Hello, everybody. Welcome to Alex, Dana, Alexandra, and Whitney taking over the weekend news desk here at Nightlight Astrology. We're off to a good start. Um, it's great to see you all. We are going to be doing weekend content for Adam's channel. We will literally be manning the weekend news desk. So each of us is going to kind of pick a theme over the course of a month. We're going to try to bring in some really fun stuff and just kind of bring astrology to life in some different ways. But before we get into it, as Adam likes to say, go over to nightlightastrology.com, check out Adam's courses and classes. They're phenomenal. I think that he's doing an in-person retreat coming up soon too, which will be really fun. And make sure you like and subscribe and do all the good things with the YouTube channel as well. So, each of us, over the course of a month, will pick a sort of theme that we're going to focus on. And Leo Rising, I said, wouldn't it be fun to take some celebrity or famous people charts and just talk about them, bring them to life? Because I think astrology is, the part of astrology is learning the nuts and bolts and the technicalities and how the archetypes show up and how that all comes together. But I think it's really important too to see charts that are lived. And in examples that, we may know well better than others, but that come to life in a way where we can talk about like this person's life, this public persona, this is how we could see it in a chart. So these wonderful ladies have indulged me by beginning with Madonna. Hallowed be her name. Okay. So I will put this
Crazy.
in
Right.
context that I used to drive around when I was 16 years old, blasting Express Yourself out of the car windows, like on repeat. I think it's amazing that anyone in the suburbs of Boston has sanity left because they probably all heard me driving around. But anyways,
They
we were
still
going to
talk
take a,
about you.
they still it's a legend. It's a legend here in Massachusetts. Um, but we also want to look at Madonna because she is a famous Leo and it's Leo season. So my sort of idea here is to bring in every month a famous person or a well-known person of that particular sign. It might be the sun sign, might be the moon sign, might be the rising sign. And we'll look at the chart, we'll look at some life events, we'll just look at some general ideas that we've noticed. And see what we can glean from it. Really bring the astrology to life. Madonna is actually a chart that I do teach to a lot of my mentoring students because there are some really incredible astrological coincidences in her chart. I mean, you guys will see with the Virgo stellium that she has. There's some really interesting stuff as it relates to her music and her career. But yeah, how are you guys feeling about this? Are we ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Yeah, I'm
So
excited to
excited.
talk about Madonna.
I know, right? Why bring up the chart? So Alexandra, could you talk a little bit about the birth time because you brought that up so perfectly, and I just would love to start from that.
Yeah, for sure. So right now we have from astro.com, which is a really trusted database source. We have this birth time for Madonna that is 7:05 a.m. and it is actually rated on astro.com. All birth data that we have for people of interest or eminent people is rated on what we call the Rodden scale. And the rating for this data is DD, which is dirty data, which means that we have multiple conflicting sources. And one of the most confusing parts about Madonna's source data is that she herself is a conflicting source. At some points in her career, she said that she was an Aquarius rising, but later in her career, when she's interviewed about astrology, she says, unfortunately, nobody ever knew the time of her birth. So she says, we can never know my rising sign. That has caused some speculation that maybe it was rectified. We also have a few sources that report 7:05 a.m., but there's no birth certificate in hand like we have for some other famous people or eminent people who have like A or double A rated data. So ultimately, the rising sign piece of the puzzle today is speculation, but that doesn't really change much about the rest of the chart. And I think it's a really cool example for us to start with because there's so much you can tell about a person just from their planets, even if you don't have their rising sign. So I know we're all excited to talk about that here today. And even some of the transits that we've pulled and stuff, they have really clear planetary significations without the houses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so important, because sometimes people will come to a reading, even I'm sure we've all had this experience where we're either rectifying the chart or they're like, I can't have a reading because I don't know the birth time. I'm like, yes, you can. You can have an awesome reading
Definitely. Yeah.
without your birth time because we can look at least at where the planets are. We can make some guesses. We can work with some easy questions to try to rectify or at least get close to where
Mhm.
it would be. So it's never really an impediment for the astrologer if they can put it back together.
Not at all. It's actually wild too. There has been only one reading in my life where I've conducted a full reading with the wrong birth time and come to find out that it was wrong after the fact. But what's wild is there's a way that because this work is divinatory, a lot of the things we say hit the nail on the head anyway, right? It's like what the client may need to hear in that moment. So it's really interesting when we bring up these questions about timing because, yes, of course, if we are focused on exactly placing the ascendant to a degree, it matters. But from a thematic perspective, I mean, really, you can leave a lot up to interpretation and, the creativity of the astrologer.
Agreed. Agreed. So what we've done is we actually set this chart for 7 p.m., which would give us an Aquarius rising for several reasons that we'll talk about just I wish I could say I knew Madonna privately, but from public
Maybe one day.
one day when we were just like hanging out, she was like, I'm
In
like,
one
this
of
is
your
actually my
dreams.
birth time.
Yeah.
And then I woke up and I was like, God damn it. Um, but from what we know about her work, about her music, some of what she's spoken about publicly about her life, Aquarius rising does fit for me. And I guess I'll just kick us off here, and then this can just be an open discussion. We can all just kind of jump
Yep.
in and see what we see. But that would put Virgo in the eighth house. One of the things classically that the eighth house has to do with is the idea of taboo places where angels fear to tread, different certain things that are not acceptable to sort of speak about, talk about in a certain way. And one of the things you can definitely say for Madonna's early career, um, songs like a Virgin, the video for Like a Prayer, like taking religious iconography and using it in really subversive ways, like taking, obviously sexual connotations that were coming out in really what would have been considered in the 80s, at least very subversive ways. This all feels very eighth house to me. It feels very Pluto too. And the idea, particularly of in Virgo, the idea, Virgo and Pisces, I often find, both personally and when I work with clients, have a lot to do with the ideas of purity. Things that are pure, things that are, sort of need to be sort of kept in a sort of pristine state. But you have Pluto there, you would have the eighth house there. There's something that kind of subverts that questions that turns it on its head. Like I'll often think of like Pluto as almost like the upside down sometimes, right? Where it's like you see things opposite or you see things from a totally other perspective. So that was one reason that I put Aquarius rising here. I think it fits for other reasons, but that's just where I'm starting with this. What do you guys see?
I mean, I totally agree. I think another example is her music video for Justify My Love, which was actually banned in many countries. And I think in the UK, they couldn't play Justify My Love until like after 9 p.m. or something, so
Yeah.
the kiddos wouldn't see it, right? I mean, beyond that, I don't know if I don't particularly remember this because I was like 6 years old, but she also published a book called Sex, just straight up sex, right? And in the same year as this album called Erotica, and there was so much controversy based around both of those because in this day in the early 90s, you weren't seeing that type of just blatant sexual imagery in the mainstream from such a mainstream artist. And so it's interesting too when we think about that Virgo Leo dynamic as well. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I feel like that comes up for me so clearly in a few ways, but the symbols that speak so loudly about that for me are like her Venus, basically at like 0 or 1 degrees in early Leo, depending on the time, it's either at 0 or 1 degrees. I kind of think it's like at 0, but that complicates our rising narrative. But either way, just this new ground in terms of sensuality and sexuality with any of the planets at like 0 or in those early degrees are like new cycles beginning. I also see like her Uranus, which is depending on which orb you're using for the luminaries, it's sort of conjunct the sun, but not totally under the beams, like it's emerging out. So there are some ways in which that sun Uranus are tangled up together, but it's not like the sun is just burning it alive and in a real state of combustion there. And then, Alex, I was really moved by what you said about the discernment and the purity of the Virgo. And I think I've been thinking so much lately about how Virgo's icon is literally the sacred no sayer. It is the Virgin saying, I know what I want in my body, and I know what I don't want in my body, and I know what I like, and I know what I don't like. And to have that Virgo area of her chart ruled by the Mercury retrograde, I think is really important because a Mercury that is exalted domicile in Virgo can be very intensely singularly Virgo, no sayer. And so to have it almost retrograde, like disrupted, it's really this like winking at the camera piece that I think she does, where she's like, hey, I'm showing you all of me. But of course she's not, right? Of course, this is all part of this constructed persona that she's got going on. And so that Mercury retrograde coming back into Pluto, I think is so strong. And Mercury, Pluto together are like bloodhound energy.
Mm.
For sure. For sure.
Similar to what you guys have all said already, I was sort of thinking about, because Alex had brought up Jupiter in the North Node as a potential talking point as well. I was thinking about the um, Jupiter and Mercury, and this Mercury being moving back toward Pluto in, with dignity, being a really a strong critiquing energy. Um, and obviously, we see that with religion and her art. And I forget which song it was, if it was Like a Prayer or Like a Virgin. I feel like it was Like a Prayer, where she like publicly dedicated it to the Pope. And you've got burning crosses in the music videos, and there's just all kinds of yeah, the no sayer. I feel like Alexandra is a perfect way, where she's really just critiquing and questioning and pushing back. And throughout her life, she's doing this, and not just with religion, but she's also like, from where I stand anyway, people really project onto her, right? Like
Mm.
she can do like everything she does, someone's got something to say about it. Like she's demonized. And this Virgo, kind of on a different note, really made me think about the theme of motherhood and mothering in her life. So her mom passes away when she's young, number one. Number two, she's got these conflicts with motherhood in her life where she adopts a child, and then there's some problems with that. She has to go back to the country of origin and kind of go through some lawsuits with that, and people criticized her for that and for that whole adoption process. So I know that's sort of different than what we were talking about, but it feels relevant to this Virgo stuff as well.
Hmm. I think
Yeah.
it's interesting too. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you please, Alex.
I was just thinking about like, that's another thing that I observed both with Virgo and Pisces is sometimes people who are projected upon and maybe not even realize that my sense is, and this is totally my conjecture, that she recognizes there's some projection on her, right? That's been part of her
Hmm.
success, right? But there's something about Virgo and Pisces where they're mutable, very adaptable signs, and they're where the light is being exchanged, right? Where the light and the dark. So in Virgo, that's right before the fall equinox. So the dark is taking over from the light, and Pisces, the light is taking over from the dark. There's something about being able to inhabit that kind of netherworld where you're neither here nor there, and people can kind of see what they need to see in you. For instance, like, I think about for my generation of, gay men and queer people, she was an idol for us because she bucked tradition, right? And she was pushing back against places that felt like they were trying to push back on us. And but that was our projection on her. She's always been really I don't know exactly everything she's done with the community, but she's always been for most, at least men of my generation and queer people of my generation, very, very popular in that regard. But in some ways we put that on her, right? You know, it may mean something totally different to her what she's doing. It may not. I don't know. But I think that that's something is just in general with Virgo and Pisces that I've noticed a lot is this idea of projection and like receiving other people's projections and then sometimes not exactly knowing how you fit yourself into that.
Totally. I think it's interesting because she has Neptune, which when you say the word projection, I always check out a Neptune just
Mm.
reflexively. And she has Neptune in this out of sign, but sort of degree based. I mean, it's within 6 degrees of her Jupiter North Node conjunction. So for me, I would totally look at that. And this kind of ties into what Dana was saying as well about spirituality. I had pulled some transits. Saturn was actually right atop that Jupiter North Node conjunction up there in 1996 when she gave birth to her daughter. And she fully credits that moment with her discovering Eastern mysticism, which is pretty interesting. There was a lot of other transits that were happening at that time. I won't like kind of confuse them, but I think she gave birth to her daughter in October 1996.
96.
Yeah, there was an eclipse is what it was within 5 degrees of that,
Yeah.
right there. And we were talking before, but like I fully credit her with this weird 2000s surge of like people wearing the red string on their finger. I don't know if you guys remember that whole
Yeah.
phase, the red string bracelet, where it was like, oh, everyone's into Kabbalah, and everybody's like, what is Kabbalah? It was like this resurgence of mysticism. And I think that really highlights what we said before as well about the way that symbols show up, even if you don't have the houses and the timing, because Jupiter is always going to have something to say about spirituality.
Mhm.
The sun is always going to have something to say about the Pope. So it's no surprise that, like, during those, like a Leo sun has a message right for the Pope.
Mhm.
Yeah, I know, I'm kidding, right? And look at Uranus was like right on her eastern angle too
hmm
at that point,
Yeah, her
Right. A
transits
lot
are
of crystal
super
sugar.
interesting. I think with eminent people, that's something that people kind of get confused about because sometimes a big transit will happen for them and they're like, not anything huge happened in my life. And it's like, well, you're not controlling the fate of nations, like, of
Mhm.
course, it might just have been a mood shift in your life. Whereas for somebody, who's like an incredibly eminent person might have something that feels a little louder to see.
Hmm. Hmm.
Absolutely. Well, and that 1996 was just a huge year for her anyway, as well, because she released excuse me, Evita, which
hmm
was like the first role that she actually won critical acclaim for. Prior to that, she had definitely made her foray into acting as well, but to sort of mixed reviews. And Evita is a musical. And so this so perfectly primed her to be in the spotlight in sort of like an accolade driven way. What's interesting too is if this if we are correct about guessing this rising, well, regardless of this particular rising sign, this would have been in 96, it would have been between like a second house and third house perfection year that she was in. So we can kind of see some of those other themes coming to the surface as well.
You want to say a little bit more about that, Whitney? Because I think some people might be interested to learn about like the perfection and how that might play in.
Yes, of course. So, the way that annual profections work, basically, as we age, we can move our sign one sign in each house. And so, because of this, we have these set annual profection years. So, when you are 35, for example. I think that's a first house perfection year. 36. Am I right on those numbers? I
I think
might
it's
be
a 12th house for
okay,
35 because I
35,
just
12th
finished
house.
one.
Okay, got it. Yes, which makes sense because I'm 37 and I'm in a second house perfection year, of course. So this would have aligned in her chart to these times where we talk about the ruler of the second house or third house as having even more prominence in transit. So if we are looking at an Aquarius rising chart here, we'd be looking for a second house year ruler as Jupiter. So that Jupiter being activated again holds even more prominence and loudness. For a third house year, you're looking at Mars as well. And so it's just interesting when we can kind of take these, excuse me, predictive techniques a step further by delving into some of those things beyond just what we're seeing in the natal chart itself.
Yeah,
Mm,
Alex, if you
mm.
actually if you put back up that 1996
Sure.
chart,
Okay.
there was a Saturn Jupiter square, and Saturn was in Aries in that third house that you're talking about, and Jupiter, obviously, the
Mm-hmm.
ruler of the second. So
There it
that's
is.
kind of what would have been going on there. In 1996. Yeah, Saturn in Aries, Jupiter in Capricorn. Ouch. And a little square across there too. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting how this all kind of flushes out too, because I think like from my perspective, in the mid 90s is where she really began to change in a big way. Like with, I don't remember when Ray of Light was released. I think it was 1998, but like she started to go into a very different form of
mhm,
her career around the mid to late 90s. And I think like, from what listening to her music at least, making an assumption here based on that, it seems very identity driven, which would make a lot of sense of Uranus if this is a first house chart, right? Uranus moving into the first house, or even just Uranus moving into Aquarius itself, right? There's a sense of like a whole radical shift in one's inner self that begins to shift how one expresses oneself. I've seen that happen with all the Taurus risings over the last 7 years, right? There's a
mhm.
huge shift in identity that starts to happen. And I think what's also interesting too is like this idea of, you know, a, a mutable moon and this Virgo eighth house, if it's eighth house, but just even having a mutable moon, this idea of like one's inner self, one's inner emotional world under constant change, an
Mhm.
immutable sign. Something that she's always done is reinvention. Like, I'll pull out another example here. I know I'm getting way back there now, but Cher has always been Cher. To me, Cher does Cher. She does she does the Bob Mackie thing. She
Yeah.
just does Cher. She's done it since the
Or
70s. That's
like
it.
Dolly. Dolly's
Or
always Dolly.
Dolly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Dolly's always Dolly. Madonna has like how many iterations has she gone through? But I really feel like that mid to late 90s was a big shift for
Yeah.
her in a lot of ways, artistically, at least in her music.
Uranus opposing that Venus. I think that's a really powerful symbol, regardless of the houses,
Mm,
because it
yeah.
was like a time when she didn't, she never like stepped away from being openly sexual, but it was not, that wasn't the point. It was almost like, yeah, I've done that. Okay, I'm going to do another thing now.
Mhm.
And incorporating that spirituality piece. And Virgo is Mercury's feminine magician archetype. So the idea of like that constant mutable alchemy that's going on in someone's life, and it's underscored by the fact that, as this Uranus is opposing her Venus, it's also squaring that Neptune. So it's like toying with those projected ideas and those things that we're seeing. And that Venus rules her Jupiter and her Mars. So, like, that's a time of great change, regardless of where those angles are, to have that Uranus Venus opposition, I think.
Yeah. It's interesting to me that, I mean, just to take it like super basic, maybe, but she's a Leo, right? And then we're talking about the Venus and Leo too, how she, being an artist is such a core part of who she is. But then we see her artistry evolve through her personas, through how she's presenting herself as an artist. And I don't know if we've said this before or after we started recording, but you kind of never know who she really is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's who we see and there's the Madonna that we project, what we think she is onto her, but who is she really? Who knows? I think that what we're looking at right here might be if I had to guess, not that I know her, maybe the most like authentic, if we want to call it that, version of her. Because before it's like the provocateur, like the sex coffee book, right? Where it's like softcore porn,
Right.
essentially. And now, if we see what's going on here with the transits, she's all of her midlife transits are coming through. And so it feels like definitely a new era. And we saw that play out with what happened. She goes from being like the sex goddess to the spiritual lady,
Mhm.
the mom, the mother, right? It's like such a huge shift. Um, so I just think that's fascinating.
Well, right. And then in 2000, she moves into her Uranus opposition and she marries Guy Ritchie. She has another child, her son Rocco. So yes, it's interesting to see how those midlife transits have played out when she is such a widely known public figure. And I mean, this is a person who is, we've talked so many times. How many times have we said reinvention so far in this recording, right? Like she really is kind of that not only queen of pop, she's the queen of reinvention. And yes, that's so Leo. I love what you were saying there, Dana. But it's really, I actually pulled this quote from her because I think it really speaks to, yes, the leonine qualities, but also this like Mercury retrograde happening in Virgo in its, domicile and exaltation. So she says, people seem consumed with the idea of me reinventing myself. What I've been doing is I've been slowly revealing myself, slowly peeling off the layers and getting closer and closer to who I really am.
Mm.
And isn't that just so beautifully
So good.
represented in, of course, the Virgo stellium and the Leo stellium? What I think is really interesting too, just to take this one little step further. Now, I don't use Antisha and Contra Antisha a lot in my practice, but if we look at the relationship that Virgo has to Jupiter in her natal chart, they could be just barely in Contra Antisha. They add up to about 31 degrees, which is it's like 28 to 30 degrees. If you add up those degree markers, that's where you get this sort of with contra antisha, it's a secret opposition. So you could almost think of, even though they're averse to one another, that Virgo Mercury and Libra Jupiter having like a secret oppositional relationship with one another, which I think plays out in these themes of reinvention as well.
I think it totally plays out in her relationship to religion as well. And
Mm.
it's like this very lived in, earthy, feminine, spiritual thing that's happening with domicile exalted Mercury and a moon in Virgo with Pluto there. It's like a personal practice in aversion to the solar figure of Leo sun, in aversion to, and maybe even secret opposition to the Jupiterian institutions of religion. It's like she's like, no, 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 no. I'm doing it. I'm doing this my way.
Mhm. Mhm.
God bless her for it.
Yeah, I think it was, Whitney, you also mentioned something about these big midlife transits, and I was interested in her Saturn return too, because I feel it was like in 1985, just before her Saturn return, Saturn was in Scorpio, kind of opposing her natal Mars in Taurus in 1985, Alex.
Okay.
Saturn was in Scorpio opposing her natal Mars in Taurus. And there was a situation now before her sort of like sexual explicit reinvention. She had these photos published of her, like these nude photos that she had taken early in her career. And they were published in this way that was very dramatically sort of like it was really just done without her consent. I mean, these publications just bought these photos and just started publishing them. And they went obviously viral in whatever way was happening in 1985. And it felt like such an important thing. And she would kind of toy with the public about it. Like at one point in one of her concerts, she was like sweating, but she like was like, oh, I'm not going to take off my jacket because somebody's going to blackmail me for this picture later. Like she was kind of toying with people about this. And I thought that was such an interesting stage to set for going into her Saturn return because as her Saturn return starts, she gets married to Sean Penn. She starts an acting career with like some really flop movies. But at the same time, she is racking up these records like best-selling female album of all time, best-selling female concert of all time. And then at the end of her Saturn return, she gets divorced because Sean Penn like assaulted her and she files these charges, So it's like, I guess she dismissed the charges, but they filed the paperwork and it became public in this way. And I just thought that was such an interesting mixed bag Saturn return experience where it's like you're becoming the legend at the same time as you are grappling with these very real life issues. Like you're unhappy in your marriage and unfortunately in this big world stage way, just like being exposed like that. But at the end of that Saturn return is when she comes out and she said she comes out with like a prayer and this whole phase and the book called Sex. And she's like, oh, okay, you're gonna do this without my consent. No, no way, we're doing this my way. And she kind of like, makes it her own there. I thought that was super interesting.
Well, I think also, I mean, look at you guys. I mean, if a client came to us with these kinds of transits going on, right? Pluto is squaring in 1985, squaring her Venus,
In
conjunct her
conjunct
Neptune.
Neptune. Brutal.
I mean, while Saturn is opposing her Mars, I mean, any one of us would see that as a really tough time. And probably something like, one thing I find with Pluto a lot is sometimes it can relate to being exposed against one's will or humiliated in
Mm.
some way. There's a sense
Hmm.
where your power is stripped, especially with Neptune right there. And I think that, I mean, the lead in there is so dramatic. But I think also what you're saying, Alexandra, is so important. Is just like, but it also is bringing up her as in of herself, which is a really, I hate going back to Virgo, and I've been on Virgo for like this whole thing, but that is a really important part of like the Leo
Yeah,
Virgo story is like being yourself. Like she's making this, regardless of her marriage status or who she's with or what's going on, herself is becoming much more prominent and self like standing on her own 2 feet in a big way in a
totally.
big stage.
You
Can
want to
you,
hear?
Alex? Oh, I'm so sorry. Whitney, I want to hear what you have to say, but Alex, could you just fast forward the clock to when that Uranus hits her Saturn?
Yeah,
I'm just curious about that. I'm going to look
yeah,
stuff up, but go ahead, Whitney, you talk.
Yeah,
yeah.
you look it up because I was just going to say just a few days further from the chart we were looking at before 85. I just wanted to mention it's so funny and it's so very Leo. Did you know that she married Sean Penn on her birthday in
Oh
85?
God.
Like, of course a Leo gets married on their
That's
birthday.
funny.
That's crazy,
Alex,
actually.
are you getting married on your birthday?
No, but I'll make it my birthday.
I think the only thing more Leo than getting married on your birthday is basically not getting married on your birthday so you have a second birthday. You
Of
get two
course.
occasions.
Yes.
You have
But
to
yeah,
stretch out the celebrations. That's what you have to do.
yep. No, this is so interesting because this is right when she recorded this album, True Blue, that became the most best-selling. It's her best-selling studio album still to this day. And it's like the best-selling album by a woman of all time from that era. So that Uranus atop her Saturn it's like there's such an interesting relationship when you work with these transits. Like if she had just kind of shut down at that stuff, it can really like fester root in, especially if you have earth sign stuff and you're like, ugh, or fixed sign stuff. But she took it and ran with it and like, Uranian style liberated it and decided to break those chains and not let them kind of hold her in at this time. So interesting.
I think this time is so sweet too because that True Blue era, Rolling Stone, of course, reviewed True Blue during this time. And this was an album she had written from her experience married to Sean Penn. And so Rolling Stone says of True Blue that this album really comes from the heart, which is also such a Leo stellium thing, just so evocative of that. It's just gorgeous.
What a time. It's interesting too, also, I think what was so interesting about Pluto moving into Scorpio just generationally was there was so much around subversion going on in the culture in so many ways, right? And I think that, especially the 80s, it's funny because I was a kid in the 80s. I'm outing myself as much older than all you guys know. I'm realizing this. And so just
Not
started my
much
eight,
older.
well, older. I was a kid in the 80s. And you don't really think about it, but there was a lot of crazy stuff happening. The Cold War was still happening. There was still the AIDS crisis was really coming into full swing in the mid 80s. It was a really scary time in a lot of ways. And I think like people like her, I remember looking at her, I was more coming into like really loving Madonna in the early 90s, as I was coming of age. And there was something refreshing about someone who almost like not projected, but like assuaged those anxieties by going right for it, like going right for what the thing was that was kind of trying to scare you or get you. Like how she
Hmm.
like stood on stage and just was just like, I'm not taking my coat off because someone's gonna like blackmail me with this picture. Like
Hmm.
she's addressing it and going right for it. And there's something about that kind of courage, which again I would say is a Leo quality for sure, of just like like you said, Alexandra, I'm not going to buckle underneath this. I'm not going to buckle underneath all this scary stuff that's happening. I'm going to go right for it. I'm going to move further into it. I'm actually going to throw it back at itself. There was something that almost felt, I don't know, like oddly motherly protective about it in some way. I remember that in what was her first documentary? It's not I'm going to tell you a secret. It was one she did during the Blonde Ambition tour. I can't remember the name of it. But there was something about the way she would say, like, we don't care what people think of us. Like she's sitting in her hotel room and she's like, no. And it was almost like adolescent in the way she did it. But there was something that felt very calming and protective of just like someone who was so well known, just kind of throwing it all back and not being cowed down underneath what I mean, just by transits, those are that's enormous pressure in those transits, not the least of which are the events that those transits were representing.
Yeah, the documentary is called Truth or Dare, which is so good.
Oh,
I can't believe I
I
forgot the
think that's
name.
so good. And even you're talking about like there's something sort of motherly about that. There's also something sort of fatherly about that. It's like it's sort of just
Yeah.
like, no, I'm a new thing. And I think that's so spoken to by this Uranus squaring her moon by degree, trining her sun, trining her Uranus. And like it was interesting because I grew up also queer, also listening to Madonna, also idolizing her for different reasons. Talk about projections, right? Like even in our two different experiences, like we have different projections for her, right? But
Exactly.
I remember being very young, like singing around my living room with a broom, like singing like a prayer, which like why were my parents letting me sing that? But it was like I felt that Uranian spirit even then. It was just like, oh, I want to be like that. I want to be that kind of person. It's like a new
Yeah.
mom and new dad right there in the symbols.
I love it. I love it. What a time to talk about. I mean, just in terms of like, I just keep thinking like if a client came in with these transits, I'd be like, okay, let's get to work.
I
You
see that. I
know?
feel like
yes.
a lot of times clients come in after these transits and they're like, you
Yeah.
wouldn't believe what I've been through. Tell me it gets better. And I love getting to tell the client, like, you will never go through what you just went through again. So don't worry.
That's in the rear view.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else we want to talk about in terms of transits, Alexandra? I just had a couple more points on the chart before we start wrapping up, but
Yeah. I mean, I'm down. I have a few other transits, but we can also go back to the natal. I think her natal chart is so interesting. So,
um, so I'm thinking of the Libra here, Dana. Our
Yeah.
Libra. Dana and I are Libra almost twins, moon and rising. Every time we would record the horoscopes, it would be like, you go first. No, no, you, please. No,
Every
no, please,
time.
you. Every time. Like we could never get
you want me
no.
to, are you saying you want me to tell you the transits?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
No,
No problem. I'm a
but
card
no,
buff.
but I'll tell you, one of the things I thought was because I was listening to American Life, which I haven't listened to in years. I was listening to it today at the gym before we got on this call, and there's this part in the middle where she's almost rapping, and she goes, I've got four lawyers, a manager, three houses, and a chef. Do you think I'm satisfied? Right? And she keeps
Mm.
saying this over and over in different ways. Like, I have all these things. Do you think I'm satisfied? And I just kept thinking Jupiter in the North Node. Jupiter in the North
Geez.
Node. Boy,
Yes.
if like she was writing that into this song, because one of the things about the North Node that's really interesting, I talk with clients about this a lot, is it can represent acquisition and manifestation, but also craving. Like that
Hmm.
sense that like there's an emptiness that you can't quite fill, or there's something you're looking for that you can't quite find. And I just thought like whether she's just writing that into music or she's writing something out of her mind, I don't know. But it was so perfectly representative of a Jupiter North Node conjunction. More, 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 but the more never quite feels like it clicks. There's like another thing, you know?
Yeah. Well, then I mean, it really gets at what Jupiter's all about, right? Because we could talk about the spiritual angle too. It seems like all her life there's this quest for deeper spiritual understanding. But then there's that side of her that's like, I'm a material girl, like I like my stuff. I like being rich and I like all that comes with this lifestyle that I have. And I think that lyric you just pointed out, Alex, is like, that's the path that this conjunction took her on of like, yeah, I like stuff. I can get stuff. I'm highly successful my whole life, essentially. And is it ever enough? Is that really what I'm looking for? Is it something else? And then it leads her down this path of developing a deeper connection to a spirituality that really means something to her rather than the kind of, at least the way she sees it, dogmatic spirituality that she's sort of bucking throughout her whole artistic career.
Amen.
Totally. Especially if she is an Aquarius rising, because that puts her south node in the third house. And so it's another form of speaking to that opposition, regardless of whether it's the third house or not. This is true. But like Jupiter is spiritual, but it's not spiritual in that third house way, right? It's spiritual more so in the ninth house way. And so to have it conjunct the north node, which is often that hunger that Alex is talking about, it's almost like I could imagine her looking for an institution big enough to hold her. That's like,
Mhm.
can you hold my sexuality? Can you hold my femininity? Can you hold my magnitude? And if the answer is no, I'll build it myself. And
Mm.
that's almost that Jupiter South Node opposition, where it's just like the South Node wants us to look at some of the spiritual reasons for our hunger. And there's like some tension there. They're both at the negotiating table of that opposition.
100%. Ooh, wow. I feel like I know Madonna a little better
Right?
So do I.
What a
Yeah.
fun exercise.
now. Really fun. Is there anything else you guys want to go through or look at or anything of transits or whatever's going on?
I feel like we've done such a good
Yeah,
job, and there's so much more to talk about with any of these things. But
I know. I
thank you for
know.
bringing us fearlessly to Madonna's chart and celebrating the Leo of the month.
Welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I just feel like astrology, we all know because we love astrology so much, you can get so caught up in the wonderful intricacies of all of it. But
Hmm.
really watching someone live the transits and see them in and she has just such a, whatever you think about her life or what she's done, it's a pronounced life. It's a life people know, they're aware of in some way, shape, or form. And so thank you guys for going through that with me. It was really, really fun.
This was so
Thanks for,
fun.
yeah, thanks for
Yay! Should
doing
we
it.
tell everybody where to find us? Whitney, you want to go first?
Oh,
Yes.
sure. Thank you. Yes, you can find me at online to book a reading at astroarcana.com. You can also find me on Instagram at astro.arcana.astrology. And I have a channel here on YouTube, which is the same handle, astro.arcana.astrology. Love it. Who's next? Popcorn Dana.
He brought back popcorn reading. I love it.
Yeah.
Love it so much. I'm Self-Help Witch everywhere on Instagram, on YouTube, and on my website, selfhelpwitch.com.
Nice. I'm Nine Lives Astrology, the number nine lives astrology. And I have weekly astrology stuff coming out every week on Mondays on YouTube. I'm on Instagram. I'm on my website. I'm around. What about you, Alex?
I am at www.alexamorosi.com. You can book readings with me there. You can book energy work sessions with me there. And you can also find me on Substack at The Subtle Universe. That's where I am right now. I'll probably be back on Instagram at some point, but right now I'm enjoying a nice big break, which
You look like
feels good.
you're just thriving without it. And so I'm almost like, just don't come back.
Yeah, I know.
Good
I
for
just felt
you.
like
Don't
it was
come
like,
back.
oh, this feels so good.
Yeah.
I have to do, yeah, for sure. Anyways, thank you all so much for joining us today on the weekend edition. I really feel like it's the news of
I know,
Nightlight
right?
Astrology. As always, go to nightlightastrology.com and check out all of Adam's great stuff. And we will see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Next weekend.
Bye.
Next week.
Yeah.